Under the gentle midday sun, Park Cafe gleamed like a hidden gem amidst the bustling city. Nestled between rows of lush green trees and the soft trickle of a nearby fountain, the cafe was a sanctuary for the wealthy elite. Waiters in crisp white uniforms moved gracefully between tables, balancing trays filled with artisanal dishes and freshly brewed coffee. The warm scent of freshly baked bread mixed with the faint sweetness of blooming flowers, creating a refined atmosphere where sophisticated conversations and powerful handshakes were a daily occurrence. At the prime table in the center, Bernard Green sat in a perfectly tailored suit, his gold-rimmed glasses reflecting the aura of a man who had built his empire from nothing. At 72, he exuded the confidence of someone who not only owned his world, but seemingly controlled those around him as well. Across from him sat Marissa, his much younger wife, a vision of beauty seemingly plucked from the cover of a high-end fashion magazine. Her jet-black hair framed a flawlessly polished face, her bold red lipstick applied with precision. Every detail of her appearance screamed elegance, yet her eyes lacked warmth. She idly twirled a diamond bracelet around her wrist, her attention not on her husband, but on the glowing screen of her phone. Just beyond the patio fence, Malik, a homeless boy, lingered in the shadows. His oversized hoodie hung loosely over his thin frame, his dark eyes darting from table to table, not out of curiosity but necessity. Hunger gnawed at his stomach as he scanned the plates and pockets of the cafe patrons, searching for an opportunity. He was a familiar face on this street, a ghost drifting along the edges of conversations and the fringes of concern, invisible to those who passed by. When his gaze landed on Bernard's table, his stomach clenched. A steaming bowl of soup, fresh bread, and a glass of sparkling water. It was the kind of meal he hadn't seen up close in months. But what caught his attention was not the food. It was Marissa's subtle, calculated movement. With a quick glance to ensure no one was watching, she reached into her designer handbag, pulled out a small vial, and twisted it open. With a casual flick of her wrist, she tilted the bottle ever so slightly over the soup. The liquid blended instantly, disappearing as if it had never been there. Malik froze, his breath caught in his throat. Had he really just seen that? Could a woman so polished, in a place so refined, truly be doing what he thought? His heart pounded as he crouched lower behind the railing, torn between fear and a sinking realization. Something was terribly wrong. As Bernard adjusted his glasses and picked up his phone, Marissa's hand slipped into her designer handbag with practiced ease. Her movements were so smooth, so deliberate, that no one took notice. Not the waiters, not the other patrons, and certainly not Bernard. But Malik saw everything. From his position just beyond the patio railing, his sharp eyes locked onto the small vial she had retrieved from her bag. He watched as her fingers twisted the cap open with a swift, effortless motion. Then, in a move so subtle it was almost imperceptible, she tipped the vial over Bernard's steaming bowl of soup. The clear liquid disappeared instantly, dissolving into the broth without a trace. Malik's breath caught in his throat. Had he really seen that? The elegance of the cafe, the polished atmosphere, and the refined guests. It all felt too perfect, too put together for something so sinister to unfold here. Yet the way Marissa stirred the soup, her expression calm and composed as if nothing had happened, sent a chill through him. Then, leaning slightly toward Bernard, she whispered something, her voice so low that Malik barely caught the words. "After all the trouble I've gone through, you won't ruin this now." The boy's heart pounded, his fists clenched at his sides. What trouble? What was she talking about? He turned his gaze to Bernard, who remained oblivious, distracted by whatever message had appeared on his phone. His spoon hovered above the soup, just moments away from tasting what had just been tainted. Malik wanted to look away, to pretend he had seen nothing. Why get involved? Who would believe a kid like him, a boy in a tattered hoodie with no home, no status, no voice. The people in this cafe didn't even acknowledge his existence, much less take his word over a wealthy, sophisticated woman like Marissa. He could just walk away, keep his head down, and let the moment pass. But deep down, he knew the truth. If Bernard ate that soup, he wouldn't survive. Malik took a shaky breath, steeling himself. The weight of his decision pressed down on him like a heavy chain. The entire cafe carried on, oblivious to the danger sitting at the center table. No one else had seen what he had seen. No one else was paying attention. If he didn't act now, no one would. Malik's heart pounded as he crouched lower behind the railing, his mind racing. What was he supposed to do? A part of him screamed to turn away, to pretend he had seen nothing. But another part, the stronger part, knew that if he did nothing, a man would die right in front of him. His breath was shaky, his hands clenched into fists. The weight of his decision pressed down on him like a heavy chain. He glanced around the cafe. People laughed, sipped their coffee, and enjoyed their meals, completely unaware. No one noticed the small, scrappy boy standing at the edge of their world. No one cared about a kid like him. And even if he spoke up, who would believe him? A street kid, dirty and unnoticed, accusing an elegant, well-dressed woman of something as sinister as poisoning her own husband. But then his eyes flicked back to Bernard. The older man was still distracted, his spoon now dipping into the tainted soup. The silver utensil gleamed under the midday sun, its surface trembling slightly in Bernard's aged hands. He was seconds away from taking a bite. Malik's chest tightened. He couldn't let this happen. He wouldn't. Without thinking, he pushed off the railing and strode forward. His legs felt heavy, like lead, but his feet didn't stop. His voice cracked as he shouted loud enough for everyone to hear, "Don't eat that!" The cafe fell into a stunned silence. Conversations halted mid-sentence. A fork clattered onto a plate somewhere in the background. All eyes turned to him. Bernard froze, his spoon just inches from his lips. His wide, confused gaze locked onto Malik. Across the table, Marissa's head snapped up so quickly that her sleek black hair whipped over her shoulder. Her eyes, once indifferent and distant, now burned with a sharp, dangerous glare. "What did you just say?" she demanded, her voice like ice cutting through the hushed air. Malik's breath came fast and shallow, but he stood his ground. His body trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer force of adrenaline surging through him. "She put something in your food," he said, his voice steadier this time. "I saw her. Don't eat it." A collective gasp rippled through the cafe. People exchanged shocked glances, their once relaxed faces now tense with curiosity and disbelief. The elegant facade of the cafe cracked, replaced by an atmosphere of unease. Bernard's face darkened. Slowly he set the spoon down, his hand trembling slightly. "Marissa." His voice was calm, but there was something cold beneath it, something calculating. "What is he talking about?" Marissa scoffed, rolling her eyes. "He's lying," she snapped, her voice laced with venom. "Look at him. He's just a street kid trying to cause trouble. He probably just wants money." Her words stung, but Malik didn't waver. He stared directly at Bernard, his eyes pleading for the man to listen. "I don't want anything," Malik said, his voice firm. "I just don't want you to die." Bernard hesitated. His sharp, business-hardened mind was at war with itself. But there was something in the boy's voice, a raw, unfiltered honesty, that made him pause. Marissa, on the other hand, looked furious. "Enough of this nonsense," she snapped, pushing back her chair. "Eat your damn soup, Bernard, and let's go." But Malik took another step closer, his fists clenched. "If you won't believe me," he said, his voice rising, "then call someone to test it. You're rich. You can do that. But if you eat it now, you'll regret it." Bernard's eyes flickered from his wife to the soup. Then he slowly leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. He wasn't going to eat it. Bernard stared at the bowl of soup in front of him, his mind clouded with doubt. Could this street kid really be telling the truth? It was absurd, unbelievable even. And yet something about the way Malik spoke, his urgency, his unwavering gaze, planted a seed of doubt deep within Bernard's chest. Across the table, Marissa's composure was beginning to crack. Her hands, once gracefully folded, were now gripping the edge of the table with white-knuckled force. Her jaw tightened as she tried to maintain her air of control, but Bernard noticed the slight tremor in her fingers. "This is ridiculous," she spat, forcing a laugh. "You're seriously entertaining the words of some filthy street rat over your own wife." Her voice was sharp now, defensive, as though she could already feel the noose tightening around her. Bernard remained silent, his gaze shifting between Malik and Marissa. The entire cafe was watching. The elegant diners, the waitstaff frozen in place, all of them waiting for his response. The weight of their stares pressed down on him like an unbearable force. Malik, despite the tension, did not back down. He took another cautious step forward, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. "I saw her do it," he said, his voice steadier now. "She took out a small bottle and poured something into your soup when you weren't looking." Marissa let out a harsh, exasperated scoff. "You really believe this nonsense?" she demanded, turning to Bernard with wide, incredulous eyes. "Come on, Bernard. Just eat your soup so we can leave." But Bernard wasn't moving. Instead, he reached for the spoon, not to eat, but to lift it closer to his nose. He inhaled carefully, his expression unreadable. Then he set the spoon down with deliberate slowness. He looked at Marissa. "What did you put in it?" His voice was dangerously low, edged with something unspoken, but unmistakably cold. Marissa blinked. For the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. "Bernard, you can't actually believe this," she said quickly, her voice softer now, almost pleading. This is insane. He's just some kid off the street." Bernard cut her off with a single glance. "If he's lying, we can test the soup," he said simply. A ripple of murmurs spread through the cafe. Marissa's face drained of color. "No," she snapped, her voice rising. "This is absurd. You're seriously going to let a filthy, lying street urchin ruin our day? Let's go. Now." But Bernard didn't move. Instead, his eyes narrowed, sharp as a blade. "Why are you so nervous, Marissa?" Marissa's lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time since the confrontation began, she looked cornered. Then Malik delivered the final blow. "If you have nothing to hide, let them test it," he challenged. Marissa's breath hitched. The cafe was deathly silent now. Everyone was waiting, watching. Bernard exhaled slowly, then turned to a nearby waiter. "Call the police." The word sent a shockwave through the cafe. Gasps erupted around them. Marissa shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "No, you can't!" she shrieked, her voice laced with sheer panic. Bernard simply stared at her. He had his answer. Marissa's breath quickened as Bernard's words settled over the cafe like a thunderclap. "Call the police." The command echoed through the stunned silence, shattering the illusion of control she had clung to so desperately. Eyes widened. Murmurs rippled across the tables. The perfect wife, the glamorous woman, the would-be murderer. Her hands trembled as she reached for her bag, as if grasping at some invisible escape route. "You're making a terrible mistake, Bernard," she hissed, her voice shaking. "This is all just a misunderstanding." Bernard didn't answer her. He simply stared, his sharp businessman's gaze peeling back the layers of the woman he once trusted. Malik, still standing firm, watched as realization finally dawned on Bernard. She had tried to kill him. The waiter, pale and visibly shaken, darted inside to make the call. The weight of Marissa's fate was no longer in her hands. She saw it too. Her expression morphed from pleading to desperate, her perfect mask slipping further with every second. Then, as if realizing she had nothing left to lose, she turned on Malik. "You little rat," she seethed, stepping toward him. "You ruined everything." Malik flinched, but didn't back down. He had already come too far. "I saved his life," he shot back, his voice unwavering. "That's what matters." Bernard's gaze shifted to him. For the first time, he truly saw Malik, not as a nameless street kid, but as the only person who had dared to speak the truth. A truth that everyone else, including Bernard himself, had been too blind to see. Then the sirens. The piercing wail cut through the air, growing louder, closer. The cafe patrons sat frozen in anticipation as two uniformed police officers entered, their expressions unreadable. "Sir, we received a call about a possible poisoning," one of them asked, his eyes flicking between Bernard and Marissa. Bernard exhaled sharply, his shoulders sagging as if he had been holding up the weight of an empire. Slowly, he gestured toward the untouched bowl of soup. "This boy," he said, motioning to Malik, "claims my wife poisoned my food. I want it tested." Marissa let out a sharp laugh, high-pitched, unhinged. "You can't be serious," she scoffed. "You're going to let this nobody dictate our lives?" The officers didn't entertain her hysteria. One of them stepped forward, crouching beside the table. He took a cautious sniff of the soup, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am," the other officer said, turning to Marissa, "is there something you'd like to tell us before we proceed?" Her confidence faltered. She hesitated, eyes darting to Bernard, then to Malik, then to the cafe full of people, each of them waiting for her next move. And then, as if she couldn't help herself, she snapped. "Fine," she spat, venom dripping from every syllable. "You want the truth. I did it. I was tired of living under his shadow. He was supposed to be gone this year, and I—" She froze. Her own words hung in the air like a noose tightening around her throat. She had said too much. The gasps around the cafe were deafening. Some people reached for their phones, recording the moment. The officers wasted no time. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for attempted murder." One of them pulled out a pair of handcuffs, stepping toward her. Marissa panicked. She tried to pull away, but Bernard was faster. He caught her wrist, gripping it firmly. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice like steel. As the officers secured her hands behind her back, she thrashed in their hold, her once carefully crafted composure shattered beyond repair. "You don't understand," she screamed. "I deserved everything he had, everything." But her protests faded as she was dragged out of the cafe, past stunned onlookers, past the waiters who had once served her with silent admiration. Now, they only watched in horrified fascination. For the first time since it all began, the cafe let out a collective breath. Malik stood motionless, his hands still balled into fists, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Had it really worked? Then, Bernard turned to him. The anger, the betrayal, the exhaustion, it was all there in his lined face. But so was something else, something close to gratitude. "Malik," he said, the boy's name rolling off his tongue as if it were a revelation. "You saved my life." Malik shifted on his feet, suddenly unsure of what to say. I couldn't let it happen." Bernard studied him for a moment longer, then nodded, his voice quieter this time. "Most people would have." A pause. Then, with a surprising gentleness, Bernard gestured toward the seat across from him. "Sit." Malik hesitated. He had never been invited to sit at a table like this before. A real seat, a real conversation, a real moment of recognition. Cautiously, he lowered himself into the chair, his muscles still tense. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't invisible. As the sirens faded into the distance, taking Marissa and her venomous words with them, a heavy silence settled over Park Cafe. The once bustling restaurant, filled with laughter and idle conversation, now felt like a different place altogether. Patrons whispered in hushed tones, their wide eyes darting between Bernard and Malik. Some were still trying to process what they had just witnessed: a near-fatal poisoning, a shocking betrayal, and a homeless boy stepping forward to expose it all. Malik stood motionless, unsure of what to do next. His fists were still clenched, his body still tense, as if expecting someone to tell him he had overstepped. After all, who was he in this world of wealth and power? Just a kid in a ragged hoodie, someone people usually ignored. But today, for the first time in a long time, someone had listened. Bernard exhaled, running a weary hand down his face before turning to the boy. "Sit," he said, motioning to the chair across from him. Malik hesitated. He had spent his life being told where he couldn't sit, where he didn't belong. But Bernard's voice wasn't dismissive or commanding. It was steady, certain, an invitation. Slowly, Malik lowered himself onto the seat. His hands rested awkwardly on his lap, unsure of the proper way to sit at a table like this. He had never been this close to such fine tableware before. Never had someone like Bernard Green address him like an equal. Bernard leaned forward, studying him. "You saved my life," he said, his voice quieter now, but firm. "I don't know how I can ever repay you." Malik shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't do it for money," he murmured. I couldn't let it happen." Bernard nodded slowly, as if seeing Malik for the first time. "Most people would have walked away." Malik shrugged. "Maybe they didn't see." Bernard's lips pressed into a thin line. "Maybe. Or maybe they just didn't want to." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a sleek black phone. "Wait here." Malik watched him step away, making a call. His pulse quickened. Was Bernard calling someone to get rid of him? Had he already done too much? But when Bernard returned, his expression was different, softer. "Help is on the way," he said simply. Malik frowned. "What kind of help?" Bernard set his phone down. "The kind that makes sure you don't have to sleep on the streets tonight." For the first time in years, Malik felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Life often places us in situations where courage and honesty become the defining factors between right and wrong, between life and death. Malik's story is not just about saving Bernard's life. It is a testament to the power of compassion and integrity, even when they come from someone who seemingly has nothing. In today's world, it is easy to turn a blind eye to things that don't concern us, but such indifference can lead to devastating consequences. Malik chose to act, despite knowing he might not be believed. His bravery is a reminder that sometimes small actions can create significant change. For older audiences, this story also carries a profound lesson. True wealth is not measured by money, but by the people we trust and surround ourselves with. Bernard nearly lost his life, not due to a lack of resources, but because he trusted the wrong person. In the end, genuine kindness and sincerity are what truly connect us, and sometimes they come from the most unexpected places.